So there's a small cast of characters that we're going to need to know for this part of our journey. A journey that's probably going to feel like it's a long ways off from the Ten Commandments, but trust me, we will get there. From 642 BC to 609 BC, King Josiah ruled over Jerusalem and the southern kingdom of Judah. The kings back then were a very mixed lot. In the stories of the kings in the Bible, one king after another is described as King so-and-so who did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. But Josiah, he was a bright light in a long line of morally repugnant rulers. He sought to bring the people of Judah back to the ways of God and away from idolatry. Then there's a figure named Jeremiah, who you may have heard of before because there's a book of the Bible named after him. He was a prophet. There's also another figure named Baruch, who was a scribe, a writer, but don't let that seemingly humble little title fool you. He may have been a very important person in his day. The first time Baruch and Jeremiah are found together is 4 years after King Josiah's death, but we think that they actually met and worked together in Josiah's court, and that their friendship and early working relationship was forged within that highly revered reign of Josiah. Egypt at that time was ruled by Pharaoh Necho, and Necho wanted to conquer the other big force in the ancient Near Eastern schoolyard, Babylon, and its king, Nebuchadnezzar. For some wild and indiscernible reason, Josiah decided to defend Babylon's honor, and he rode out in battle to defeat Pharaoh Necho. This foolish adventure cost Josiah his life, and it cost Judah its independence too, and it then became a vassal state to Egypt, meaning that each year Judah had to pay a huge tribute to Egypt. The Judean people chose one of Josiah's sons, Jehoahaz, to succeed him, but only a few months later, Pharaoh Necho captured him and took him off to Egypt. Necho then installed another son of Josiah, Jehoiakim. In 605, at the Battle of Carchemish, Necho was defeated by Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, and with that, Judah became a vassal state of Babylon. Remember back when Josiah wanted to defend Babylon's honor? Yeah, it didn't work out so well. It's here, though, in 605, that we find Baruch and Jeremiah together. They were probably part of Josiah's royal court, but now they are in direct opposition to King Jehoiakim, Josiah's son. Jeremiah's ministry took an entirely different shift. For 20-some years, he was hammering the populace, the people, for their immorality and pagan practices. Now he was focusing his entire energy on making sure that the king maintained his responsibilities to Babylon. Jeremiah said that it was God's plan that Judah be subservient to Babylon, but it would only be for a while. It would all work out. God would make sure of it, but the king had to stick to the plan, God's plan. Jehoiakim would stick to the plan, but not for long. Eventually, he stopped sending checks to Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar noticed. Jehoiakim died at a rather convenient time, leaving his 18-year-old son, Jehoiachin, on the hot seat. Within 100 days, the entire Babylonian army was on Jeremiah's doorstep. By the way, I have painful memories of being in seminary and having to memorize the kingly lineage of Josiah, Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin. I used a mnemonic device. Kim had a chin to make sure that I got them in order. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar seized Jehoiachin and took him back to Babylon, and then installed another son of Josiah, whose name is Zedekiah. Even though Jeremiah and Baruch were imploring Zedekiah to be a good boy and play along, he eventually rebelled against Babylon too. The Babylonian army returned to Jerusalem. It laid siege to the city for 2 years, during which time Jeremiah was thrown in prison for going against King Zedekiah. Eventually, Babylon broke down the walls and utterly destroyed the city, killing a huge portion of its populace while they were at it. They destroyed the palace of the king, the walls that surrounded Jerusalem, and the temple of God. They took a lot of survivors back to Babylon. Peasants were allowed to stay and try and eke out a living in the rubble. Jeremiah and Baruch were not taken to Babylon, probably because they were seen as friends of Nebuchadnezzar, because they were publicly against the rulers of Judah who kept trying to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar. But Jeremiah and Baruch had had front row seats to the atrocity that was the Babylonian campaign against Judah. They had warned everyone, and they were proven to be correct. Baruch was Jeremiah's scribe. Jeremiah would have dictated his prophecies, and Baruch would have written them down. It is pretty well established that Baruch is the scribe who wrote down the book of Jeremiah, and probably the book of Lamentations too. But that's not all. There are many links between Jeremiah and a selection of books called the Deuteronomistic history, which is made up of Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. In fact, there are so many links that we think that Baruch may have actually written all of it. Specifically, perhaps, to tell the story of Moses setting God's people up with the law and then the subsequent breaking of all the laws until God's people don't have a country to call their own anymore. If this is true, then Baruch may be the most prolific biblical author, more so than even St. Paul. And he's an editor. We think that he was also the one who edited Leviticus and Numbers so that they contained the little stories of commandment violations too. One last little thing. We actually have something of Baruch's. In the 1970s, there were several clay seals discovered that had been marked from signet rings. A scribe or other official would do this as a way to sign a document. One of the seals that was discovered reads, "Belonging to Baruch ben Neriah, the scribe." If it's genuine, and most scholars think that it is, then this is as close to an autograph that we have from a biblical author and editor. Here's a question to think about. Why is it sometimes so hard to get people to go along with God's plans?